consider this a professional courtesy.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name's Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Once again, bringing you all kinds of wonderful stuff as it relates to the wonderful world of real estate. We've got some interesting stuff here. There's a bigger story here. It's kind of a California story, really. So I apologize to those of you who do not give a crap about California. I think most, even folks who invest in other states, I think see California as one of the places you look as a canary in the coal mine sort of a thing. You try to get indicators of what might hit the markets overall. When really bad things happen in California, those things tend to overlap into other areas. I know that as a California real estate guy, there's a lot of different communities across the country that I also tend to look at. Las Vegas is one, Phoenix is one. I tend to look at Miami. I'm not real sure why. The Miami tends to be a pretty funky little market all by itself. New York are good examples. And pretty much any place in Texas. I mean, I like looking at data for places like Austin and Dallas and whatnot, just to kind of see what's going on there. Because there's some very interesting things when you put them one as opposed to the other when you're looking at that stuff. But let's not get all 10,000 foot view here. Let's actually focus in on some specific details. Now, one thing I wanted to do, as we always do, right? Every year, we like to go through and examine what are some of the trends that folks are expecting to come down the pike. First one we'll cover for the year of 2018 are the good folks from U.S. News and World Reports. And World Reports is still part of their title, yeah? U.S. News and World Report, yeah. They've got some interesting things to say, and right at the beginning, they have some things that seem to contradict themselves, and we'll cover those. But there's also a few discrete little pieces of data that I think are interesting, and they relate specifically to California. And I bring them up because they're trends that I've talked about here on the show that I've seen in terms of real world on the ground experience. You know, when I'm talking to folks who are selling, and I talk to an awful lot of folks who want to sell or are thinking about selling, and when you find out why they want to move or where they want to go, it's interesting. And there's a really big difference between not so much the fact that of where they're going to go, which is kind of interesting, but between folks who are older and folks who are younger. There's an interesting different set of reasons why, but that when you trace them back, when you take them from a very specific and kind of try to find a route, they almost go back to the same place. So I thought I'd bring that up because the big question for me in a lot of these is California about to surrender its position as this crazy lucrative real estate market in terms of just this continued growth? And I think that's a valid question to ask. And I think for some other reasons, it's more of a mental exercise. But instead of thinking of it in terms of surrendering its position, maybe what we get out of this is information that lets us, in a more near term, anticipate declines in a market that, because of what all California has to offer. Now, no matter how you slice it, before we get into the details of some of these theories and these projections, there's some things we got to understand right off the bat. Number one, people love coasts. That's just the way it is. Populations tend to move to coasts. Now, of course, a certain set of circumstances can be so burdensome that they overcome that motivation, but eventually things come back, right? So the things that are making people think about potentially leaving California or other coastal states, when you get enough of a negative effect from that, the theory is that the market responds to that. Now, of course, you also have governments working outside of markets that can really screw with things one way or the other. But in general, those things tend to happen because no matter how much governments want to not admit it, they have to respond to markets in a lot of ways because of particularly when it comes to the world of real estate and population, because the reality is that those are the people who pay for stuff. And if you get enough people who are contributing to paying for stuff leaving, then there's a big problem. So the question is, at what point do the circumstances that you're forced to live under overcome all the cool things about California that you can't change, that aren't controlled by the government or by the state, right? One thing that's amazing about California is you could spend the morning at the beach, the lunchtime skiing, and have dinner in the desert. I mean, it's kind of an amazing place in terms of just all that stuff, the natural beauty, the cool stuff to do. No matter what you like to do as a hobby, whether it's surfing or skiing or running or bike, whatever it is you want to do, California is a pretty awesome place to do it. So there's that. And the weather isn't as rainy as it is in the other two states to our north. So the weather itself is just freaking amazing by and large. I mean, after driving to Seattle, doing what I had to do up there with my son, going to school up there, and even visiting Boise, which was great. I loved Boise. I thought Boise was fantastic. But yeah, California's got the edge on the rest of the country when it comes to weather in a lot of ways. Are there other places just as good? Yeah, but those other places also don't have oceans to play with. So anyway, I wanted to lay that out there because I think that this isn't a strategy that you stick a stake in the ground and say, this is now the new truth for California. I think it's an evolving and changing thing. So it's more of something for us to help guide our decision-making process as we move along. Okay, so let's start. We've really got kind of at the core here, two mental nuggets I want to bounce around. It's two different articles. One, again, is the U.S. News and World Report's article, What to Expect from the Housing Market in 2018. And then the other one is an article kind of specifically aimed at the high-tech world of Silicon Valley in California, and some comments made by the Redfin CEO, because I don't think he's necessarily wrong in some of his estimates. And we'll get into that and see what we kind of, when we're peering through the looking glass here, what do we see in terms of things that might affect real estate market values? All right. So now let's talk about in general. Obviously, this U.S. News and World Report's article is going to be something that's talking about national numbers, the averages, right? And one of the things I like to try to do is translate this into a language that we can use to figure out how we can use this data to help us suss out better stuff in our local market. So we'll do that as well. I like for you to use these as templates, right? So that we're not saying this is what you should do everywhere, but we're saying this is what's happening on average across the country. So take this data and then take a closer look at your local scenario. Does it fit? One interesting thing when you do that is if you do find an area that you're in that totally doesn't fit, if you can figure out why it doesn't fit, what makes it unique enough that the average data really doesn't seem to apply to you, you might just find yourself facing a market niche that could make you money, right? So, and thinking your way through this stuff, taking stuff to the next logical step. Because here's the other thing, and I've kind of got a whole bunch of things bouncing around in my head. It makes me wish I had done at least a few shows during the break because there were several things sort of bouncing around my head. No matter how uncomfortable or inexperienced you feel about real estate or jumping or anything about jumping in and doing it, the more I talk to people, the more I consume data from people that are supposed to be experts, the more I realize that so much of that is really just a color of authority argument, right? These are folks who, and you could point at me and say the same thing, right? I put out a podcast about real estate, and the reason why I think you should listen to me is I've been doing this since 1988. I have opinions that I've sort of trimmed and groomed over the course of those years. I pay attention to what's going on. But the reality is, if you did the same thing, if you went and looked through this data yourself, your opinion is going to be just about as valuable as anybody else's. So don't underestimate yourself. I mean, I don't want to turn this into a rah-rah moment, but man, you trust yourself a little bit and take a few risks based on you doing some due diligence and just some research and figuring things out after you've paid attention for a while. I think you're going to be surprised at how well you can do. because after the last few months, the thing that really has keyed this off for me is the Bitcoin thing. And I realize Bitcoin isn't really a fundamental focus of this show. I mentioned in passing that was something that you might consider doing just to sort of get yourself acclimated to the concept of risk. Now, I had a few of you reach out to me and say, I went ahead and did it and said, now I'm screwed because it went down. Well, and now 2 weeks later, it's like, oh, hey, it all went back up. I've made money. Here's the deal. Bitcoin is freaking nuts. And maybe it's one reason why I like it a little bit. There is no linking to reality with Bitcoin. I can't look at a thing and go, this will make Bitcoin go up. Right? It's as close to gold in terms of the scarcity argument that you can make, right? Because there's only supposed to be 22 million of the things, but all it's got is scarcity. That's it. Right? Gold has value for other reasons too. It also has a lot of cool uses. People like gold because of its malleability, because of its ductility, because of its ability to conduct things electrically speaking. It's pretty, so people like to wear it. It's shiny. It's got a lot of unique characteristics that make you intrinsically valuable because of what it is. Bitcoins, no. There is no rational reason to like a Bitcoin other than I have one of a thing that, and only 22 million of them will ever exist. It's like Beanie Babies. That's a really bad example. But if they only made 22 million Beanie Babies and there was some sort of an extremely magical arithmetic way to guarantee no more Beanie Babies of that kind will ever be made again, well, that could just as easily be a Bitcoin, right? And what I find interesting is, and sorry, I went in the weeds just a little bit there, but my point, what I drew away from my Bitcoin experience over the last few months is just how people freak. When you listen to people talk about, oh, wow, hey, Bitcoin went down 30%. And then the next day, oh, hey, look, it went up 40% or whatever. For me, yeah. When you have something like that that's not tied to anything other than its scarcity, you're going to get crazy fluctuations. The only thing that affects the price of Bitcoin is a blend of the fact that it has built-in scarcity and emotion, right? That's it. So that's kind of what's going to guide it. Now, is this basically going to end up turning into a financial pet rock or the equivalent of a 21st century tulip rush? Maybe. And in fact, if someone ever figures out how to make more Bitcoin above and beyond the 22 million, we already talked about this. I covered this in a show a while back. Then you're hosed, right? Because then the only thing that gives it value, which is scarcity, is eliminated. So therefore, it's not worth anything. But in any event, it's just picking your right exit point. And as of this month, Bitcoin is now going to be something, or over the next 3 months, actually, we're going to see big investment houses making Bitcoin part of options available for investors, and a lot of those big pension funds and whatnot. Remember, we talked about pension funds before. They are desperate for return. And I'm willing to bet pensions are going to put money, because that's, as of actually before the new year, pensions were able to put money into Bitcoin. And I think as we move further into 2018, more of that is going to happen. I think if we were all sitting around in our smoking jackets enjoying a cognac, we could theorize about how bad that could screw pension funds if Bitcoin does take a complete dump for a reason. And eventually someone or something will calculate a way to create more Bitcoin. They'll break the whole blockchain. Not likely to happen real soon, but I think that's a very strong reality. And boy, would that usher in a long chunk of craziness. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is just is trusting yourself. There's so much of this irrationality. There's so much craziness that goes on that we even get from folks that are supposed to be experts. And you need to understand that you can be your own expert on certain things, but the wise person is also going to be able to recognize when you're not that person. You need to consult with someone else who knows more. We've talked about this before, where the team you put together is in most ways going to really define how successful you can be. If you try to do everything, you're probably going to falter. There's probably going to be problems. But you also need to trust yourself. So, and as we talked about earlier, that comes down to really being honest when you're reflecting on your own abilities, being honest with yourself about what you can and can't do. All right, we haven't gotten into a single line of this stupid U.S. News and World Reports article. I promise we will. But we're going to take a quick break right after this, so don't go away.
Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner, broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909.
Welcome back, everyone. I guess the magical title for this show could be something really nice, some nice clickbaity title, like, is California real estate totally screwed? That'd be a good one, right? I actually had one person tell me that's what I need to do. I need to name my podcast with a more just wacky out there title so that folks will want to click on it. It seems a little bit hokey to me, but maybe we'll try it. All right, so let's jump in. As I mentioned, we're at the U.S. News and World Report's article on what they're expecting from 2018, and they're right out of the boat. Their very first quote here is, whether you're looking to buy or sell a home in 2018 or find a perfect rental, it helps to know what you're up against. Experts say timing will be paramount for home buyers in the coming months, while sellers will likely have an easier time making a successful deal. So what's the implication there? All right, so home buyers are going to have to be on it. They're going to have to be out there. And when they say timing, when they use the code word timing, they're talking about finding a house and acting quickly, usually, is what they're trying to get at. And in terms of what sellers are going to have to deal with, they're talking about sellers having an easy time of it. So what they're talking about is a replay of 2017. They're basically saying we're going to continue to see things being really in the seller's court in terms of having control. And that's, I don't think that necessarily is unreasonable. I know I've talked to you. I know that we've talked about various things that could start to cause a decline in the real estate markets. We talked about how the very first domino I thought might be a contributor to that would be the stock market in October of 2017, which turned out to be absolutely not correct. I still think that's potentially a very high focal point of bad things to come for the real estate market down the line. But clearly my timing was off. It sure as heck wasn't October of 2017. I could not have been more statistically wrong about that particular call. But all the other things we've talked about over the last year are still bouncing around out in the marketplace. Okay, but here's the next interesting sentence, because I thought this was a little bit bizarre. Meanwhile, renters may find more amenities and negotiating power. Well, that's interesting. How would renters do that? I think I know, and we'll talk about that in a second, but let's go over the rest of this first. Let's go ahead and cover what they say in terms of buying and selling. That they basically are suggesting that we're going to continue to see it being a seller's market, a very tight market on home buying. According to them, Americans are unsure, quote, about their ability to buy a home, according to a recent survey of 2,000 adults published by real estate information company Trulia earlier this month. Just 25% of respondents believe 2018 will be a better time to buy a home than 2017, according to the report. So a minority of those talked to thought that 2018 would be better than 2017. However, and this is something we've talked about on this show, those attitudes have also been kind of the dominant one for several years. These attitudes have been pervasive for years and are beginning to wane on home buyer enthusiasm. High rents hinder would-be first-time buyers' ability to save, while interest rates are expected to rise and home prices continue to swell in mid-level housing throughout the U.S. Truly anticipates the homeownership rate, 63.9% as of the third quarter of this year. To continue the slight upward trend, interested buyers will have to remain diligent, do their research, and keep a close eye out for new properties coming on the market. So again, translation, act quickly, find a house you like, and get into contract as soon as you possibly can. Affordable homes will still be found in the suburbs, according to the good folks at U.S. News and World Reports. In suburbs and outlying neighborhoods of major markets, millennials have been late to home buying due to slower income growth in previous generations. That makes moving to a more affordable neighborhood key, but it's unclear if millennials are slow to embrace the suburbs because they like the convenience of city living or they simply don't feel confident enough to buy. For sellers, they're indicating it should be a more enthusiastic year for you, likely because home prices have continued to climb in recent years. The Trulia survey reports 31% of respondents believe 2018 will be an even better year to sell than 2017 was. Of course, this enthusiasm doesn't translate to more options for buyers. Americans may feel it's a great year to sell their home, but only 6% of homeowners currently plan to do so in 2018. According to Trulia, the lack of new inventory spells opportunity for those who choose to sell, but will keep many would-be first-time buyers from jumping into home ownership due to stiff competition. So, and I've considered myself part of that chunk of 6% of sellers, homeowners who are currently thinking about selling in 2018. I am planning to sell in 2018, and here's the other part. I've had some people ask me, well, what if you called it wrong? You called it wrong on the October October Wall Street problem. What if you got this wrong? So, and my answer is, I may miss it by a year. There may be another 6% year. So yeah, you know what? It would be a real bummer if I didn't enjoy that 6% increase. But I tell you, when everything is said and done, when the downturn does come, and it always does, there's always a cyclic downturn, I am not going to be upset about it. I still think I'll be close enough to the top end that I'll feel extremely comfortable. It's the same thing that, I'm not going to be a bummed guy if I sell Bitcoin at 18,000 per Bitcoin when it reaches a peak of 20,000, right? I'm not going to cry over that extra 2,000 on Bitcoin because I've still made money. Now, then they get into some interesting discussion about new construction and development. But before we talk about that, I wanted to get into the renting thing because their original comment on this, I thought was a little bit interesting. How could things be getting better for renters if it's still a seller's market? There's still not that much of the buyers out there jumping out and doing its thing, because that spells more people moving to the rental market, right? So when you get a higher demand in rentals, how does that help? So I think what we need to do is really clearly delineate in our minds the difference between rentals, right? The apartment style rental and the house style rental. And under the house style rental, we'll even include duplexes, right? In their article, they start off by saying if more first-time buyers don't embrace the suburbs, the share of renters versus homeowners in the U.S. will continue to grow. New construction following the recession is largely focused on meeting demand for rental options, and major cities in particular are beginning to experience some relief in rental rates and even incentives for renters with the completion of many new properties. If you're a renter, there are options. There's incentives. There's free months rent. You have the pick of the litter currently. You won't see rental rates in luxury buildings suddenly dropping to mid-level prices, but you can expect a bit more power when it comes to negotiating your lease, especially if you're looking at a neighborhood where more than one new building is beginning to lease to tenants. So what's the assumption in all this? The assumption in all this is that all of you who are out there who want to become renters are going to become apartment-style renters. And we can also lump into this those of you who are investors who own a condo that is an apartment style condo. Now, I realize there's a wide range of condo architectural types. For those of you who aren't from California, in this area, frequently you'll find a home that you would swear looks like a single family residential, or maybe an attached single family residential, or maybe even a townhome style home that is a condo. A condo is a legal term here, not an architectural description. So it's the way that the property is organized legally in terms of what you own, right? And I think we all know, we can do a quick review. With a condo, you own the airspace inside the unit. If you have a development where the thing you live in, no matter what size or configuration it is organized as a condo, typically the homeowners association will cover even stuff in the walls, your wiring and the piping and all that kind of stuff. Some will, some won't. But I know in several condo HOAs that I've sold homes in the past, that's exactly what they do. Anything is covered by the HOA, which is nice. It usually means higher HOA fees, but at least it's nice. Next are townhomes, which you own the dirt that the thing sits on and everything, and you own the footprint of the physical property going up, but all the rest of it is considered community property, so it's maintained by the HOA. You don't paint your place, you don't do the roof. Same with a condo. The association handles all that stuff. So you would be responsible for any repairs inside your unit. Is a good example. It tends to be a defining factor of those types of things in my marketplace. Now I realize these terms may mean different things to you depending on where you are in the country, but just so you know, that's what I'm thinking when I use those terms. In this case, we're talking about anyone who owns a property that they rent as a private individual that is like an apartment, right? So, and interesting to make that delineation, because if you're going to see a lot of choices in those types of marketplaces, you need to be aware of that in your own mind if you are a person who owns rental properties, if you're a landlord, or if you're thinking about acquiring property to become a landlord of that property. Because what I see here isn't something that tells me, oh no, I need to be worried about my single family residential home in this market because this new apartment complex is going up. No, I don't see it that way. I think that what that means is you may have some competition. It may mean you need to not raise your rent for a period of time, but I think it's just as likely that demand for your stuff will be just as strong because you're a completely different kind of house, right? As soon as people live in an apartment and they have children, the very next thought they have is, we got to get the hell out of here. And folks who I've worked with over the last few years who are living in an apartment and we're trying to get out to buy a place, I never hear good stories. I never hear, yeah, you know what? We've really loved living here. This place has been amazing. Our neighbors upstairs and downstairs and to the left and the right of us have been amazing. Dealing with the kids in this apartment complex has been awesome. Never hear that. I've never heard that. Could it happen? I'm assuming it does. I'm assuming that there are some folks who love living like that. Those folks are going to go buy a condo. They're not going to buy or stay in their apartment. They're not going to move. So I don't. This level of competition they're talking about, and what's also bizarre about this is, and it's something we've talked about, there's been so much construction of apartment style living that I honestly think a lot of this stuff is going to convert into condos. I don't think it's a sustainable thing, at least in my local area. If you were to take a driving tour of Silicon Valley with me, I could show you apartment campuses that would blow your mind. There's one in South San Jose, just off the 85 freeway, and I realize for most of you that means absolutely nothing. But if you're driving north on the 85 from the 101, just a little bit up past the where the two meet, there's a gigantic apartment complex on the left and on the right. The one on the right is nuts. It's huge. It's something like 9 stories tall, and there's like 8 buildings. Absolutely ridiculous. That's not going to be sustainable. That's one of those things where those things are eventually going to get converted over into condos. And that's going to represent a big chunk of the marketplace in terms of taking down prices. And you can also see the same kind of stuff going on in places like Gilroy, which are ridiculously south of Silicon Valley, not even considered typically a bedroom community for Silicon Valley, although it is in some cases. But the reason it's a bedroom community is folks move there to buy a single family residential to then commute to San Jose because the commute is horrible. Anyway, all right. So the stuff they're talking about really focuses on this idea that folks are going to swamp the I want to live in an apartment style living. And I think that's a bad assumption. I honestly don't think that for absolute reasons of necessity, people will do that. But as soon as any breathing room comes into the market, these folks are going to be looking to get the hell out of those apartments, unless these are amazing apartments. So we'll see how that goes. That's my take on it. Let's go ahead now and talk about what they were saying in terms of new construction. They talk about how one of the housing market's biggest struggles has been a lack of new inventory come on the market. New construction hasn't kept pace with the growth of U.S. households, and while construction has picked up in recent years, much of the development has been in multifamily. Absolutely, apartments for rent or condominium communities, leaving many prospective buyers out in the cold. Quote, much of the new development centers around trying to create an environment that allows tenants and residents, all users, to have that live, work, and play feel with a mix of retail, office, and residential spaces so residents don't have to travel far. There's been a lot of that. And a lot of that, what's really bizarre is I don't see the demand for that. I see that we all go through a segment of our existence where that's an attractive thing. I get that. I went through that. And what I don't understand is why people think millennials are so different in this regard and that this is what they want in terms of a long-term, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to live. I'll be honest. I have all these things that are supposed to completely redefine real estate that are supposed to be millennial driven. I'm not seeing it. And what we tend to see is stuff like this that assumes this is how these folks want to live. And we discover, hey, you know what? They're kind of making the same decisions on what they do and don't want that the previous generation made. But the difference is not what they want. The difference is what they can afford to do. That's it. The desires I hear from my folks who are shopping that are millennials has absolutely nothing to do with, you know what? We really kind of want just something smaller and cozier that's right over a Chinese food place. That's not what they want. They want something that is within their means, and that's the big constraint. And the reason why they have more stresses is for the same reasons we've talked about for 2 years. All the charts you look at in terms of millennials saddled with college debt, in terms of all of these various things that they've accumulated that previous generations haven't, is ridiculous. So they're just under more financial stresses than a lot of previous generations. I mean, if you want to talk about a hockey stick graph, the cost of college is absolutely one of those that just goes nuts starting, right around 2000, late 1990s up to the 2000s. Okay. In addition to more mixed-use communities that blend commercial and residential property, expect the size of individual apartments, condos, and houses to get smaller as well. Now, I don't know about the rest of the country. This is the opposite. The opposite of what I hear from people when I talk to them. The whole small house thing, I did a show on this. Unfortunately, you can't search on it on the website because as I record this, my website is still hosed. But if you go to the RSS feed or if you go to, you know what? I'm going to include in the description for today's show another link you can use to get to a website. It's one that I've added all sorts of data to so that you can get links to all of the shows. You can also join the Rebel Underground. You can also click the big red button to support the show, to do the survey to support the show. It's all there. I'll put the link in the show notes for today's show so you can check that out. I'm also trying to at least get enough control of my current URL so that I can have it point to this new site until the new Rebel Broker site is ready. But it's all there. You can do a quick search on it, and it's just not a thing. I know everybody on HGTV seems to want to convince us that the small house thing is the thing that everyone wants to do. But again, you talk to people who might be considering doing it. It's a cost thing. It's not I'm doing this because I really, really want to do it. I'm doing this because I don't have a choice. If I'm going to save money for a down payment, I need to reduce my housing cost to as close to zero as possible. This is not I really love the lifestyle. I love having to, fold up my bed so I can use the toilet. No, I'm sorry. It's just not a thing. And I get there are some people who live their lives that way, but there have always been people who live their lives like that. And I've met a few of them, and they're fantastic folks, and more power to them. But if all of this hype around this concept is made up in terms of my real world experience talking to people out in the world. Okay. 4 years ago, according to this article, developers were making 2 bedrooms that were 1,200 square feet. Now they're making them 1,000 square feet. Swingler says, from the buyer's angle, it's not enough square feet for me, but it'll still work. They want to stay in the city. So, and just to give you an idea, to calibrate you to what I see on a regular basis with the folks who have searches running, and at any given time, I've probably got, in terms of active folks who are searching for properties, I've probably got, and these was what I categorize as serious people. If I wanted to really puff the numbers, I could tell you I've got 100 people doing searches. I do have probably about 100 and something active searches going. But in terms of folks who are checking those every day and really going through and clicking on the ones they like and talking about them and all that kind of stuff, it's probably 15 to 20 folks that are super serious. Plenty of millennials represented in that list. Most of them have square footage requirements set at 1,500 square feet or bigger. So they're actively limiting what they're even seeing based on square footage. So, and that's what I've always seen. That's what I saw 10 years ago. That's what I saw the 10 years before that. I don't understand why somebody needs to believe that the entire landscape of real estate is being redefined by what millennials want. Now, granted, they may be the biggest group out there, but if you're talking about what they want versus what they're doing, you need to understand that there's a difference on why those two things are so different from one another. They're not able to do what they want because they can't afford to do what they want. So they suffer through doing what they got to do in order to make ends meet. But if given a choice, if things in an economic situation were to change, they would not do this other smaller thing. So what happens when prosperity makes the roundabout and shows up and these folks suddenly have money? Well, what we're left with is a whole lot of real estate that really doesn't meet the needs that anyone has, except for a very specific smaller group, right? There will always be folks who want to rent that 2-bedroom, 1,000 square foot place or the 1-bedroom, 1,000 square foot place. Those folks will exist, but they're a relatively small chunk of the market, and they will be way overrepresented in terms of inventory out there once things kind of make the turnaround. And that could represent an opportunity for someone because those things would likely go for a very competitive price. All right, folks. I didn't even talk about the other thing. So according to our good friend Glenn Kelman over at Redfin, he thinks that coastal cities, so he's talking about not just California and Silicon Valley, but any big coastal towns, are going to cities. Homeowners are going to seek to avoid higher tax rates, and densely populated and pricey cities, he said, are already losing residents and businesses. Cities like Denver, San Antonio, and Houston are primed to be the new hubs, according to him. I think this is absolutely true. In the exchanges I have with folks that are selling, when I talk to them about why they want to go, it's about tax policy. It's about stuff they face in California. Now, I have also worked with business owners and folks who work for businesses that are relocating. That's one reason why we started talking about Boise the other day, was because a person I'm helping get rid of one of their properties, that's where they're going. They're going to Boise. And they're not retiring. I've got one person who's going to list their home early this year, first 3 to 4 months of this year. Who's going there to retire, and they're going to northern Idaho. I think it was Coeur d'Alene. I don't even remember the name of the place, but it's North Big Lake. That's where they're going. I have another person, younger, millennial age, who's going to be going to Boise to work for a high-tech firm. And that's kind of what we're seeing. It's interesting to note how the willingness to leave is not only getting stronger in the individuals who held that opinion 6 months ago, but in the data that we've looked at here on this show, we've seen an increase in the number of people who, when surveyed, said they want out. And when they say out, they don't mean of their current house. They mean the state. And the last time we looked at that number, it was creeping up to 40%. We've talked about it several times over the last 18 months. The first time, I think the number stood at 27%, then it was 30-something%, and then it was almost 40% the last time I looked. According to Kelman, he says, quote, Silicon Valley is going to leave Silicon Valley. That's already happened. The technology companies, the Wall Street companies, they're chasing the talent, and the talent is chasing affordable housing. Kelman, head of the online real estate brokerage and data company, predicted an accelerating shift out of coastal cities as homeowners seek to avoid the higher tax rates that they're facing right now. Densely populated and pricey cities, he said, are already losing residents and businesses. Now, to back that up, I did a quick check and found an article from the Mercury News that indicates that this trend is continuing. We've talked about the larger number of people leaving California than coming into it, and that is continuing to happen. Let's check this out real quick. Now, this is from Mercury News, the article's titled "Leaving California After Slowing, the Trend Intensifies." And we've all through this kind of covered this. I think population data, migration data is awesome for real estate investors. Now, my go-to place is typically the moving companies, right? Like United, Van Lines, and those guys who rent moving trucks, or the places that come and pick up your crap and move it to another state. By looking at where people are renting the truck and then dropping it off, right? That's where you get interesting data. That's real world, on the ground, timely data. And we are seeing an exodus of people from California. Even as the article goes on to state, even as the economy has recovered, notably in the Bay Area and in pockets along the coast, the latest U.S. Census Bureau estimates show that domestic migrants continue to leave the state more rapidly than they enter it. People may be leaving California, but overall, the rate of leaving is about 3/4 less than that experienced in the first decade of the millennium. Yeah, okay. That was then, this is now. Booming San Francisco metropolitan area, there was even a shift toward net domestic migration after 2010, something rarely seen since the 1980s. Out-migration dropped with the initial economic slowdown of the last recession, particularly as housing prices in some areas, notably the Inland Empire and the Sacramento area, drifted toward the national norm of 3 times income by 2010. Having been twice that high or more in the boom times. The initial recovery after 2010 may also have encouraged people to stay as well. But today, that's not the case. San Francisco Bay Area lost more than 600,000 net domestic migrants between 2000 and 2009 before experiencing a 5-year flattening. Still continued to lose overall, but it was more or less flat. The story seems to be changing now. Housing prices, first in the Bay Area and later in the metropolitan areas, have surged mightily and are now as high as over 9 times household incomes. In 2016, some 26,000 more people left the Bay Area than arrived. San Francisco net migration went from a high of 16,000 positive in 2013 to 12,000 negative 3 years later. Similar patterns have occurred across the state. Between 2010 and 2015, California had cut its average annual migration losses annually from 160,000 to 50,000, but that number surged last year to nearly 110,000. So no matter how you look at it, and you can look at the past, the bottom line is the numbers are up. And what's potentially a strategy setter is, how far does this go? Remember, one of the things we go back to in our core is the supply and demand numbers, right? Well, if the number of folks out there goes down, that reduces supply. Now, granted, you'd have to have a whole lot more folks not being there in order for it to have a bigger effect. But then also take into account the other element of this equation, the businesses leaving California. As more and more companies leave California, they take their employees with them. Going on with the article again over at CNBC, according to Kelman of Redfin, it used to be that in California we owned the future. We felt like everything was happening here first. And now you see that swagger, that confidence in the center of the country. People in Detroit, people in Texas think they own the future. And it's really hard to not see that as an interesting point as we see companies leaving the Bay Area and offering their employees amazing deals. Let me give you one, right? I wanted to finish the show with this. I apologize for making this such a long show today. But I had someone I was dealing with probably October of last year, October, November. And they were talking to me about selling their home because they had been given an offer by the company they worked for. This is what the offer was. We will not cut your pay. Move with us to Arizona, and we will continue to pay you what we've been paying you in California. And they had given all of the employees they wanted, that they were inviting to come with them, this chart, this table. And it said, here's what it costs you in California. Here's what it would cost you in Arizona. And here's how much extra money you'll actually keep in your pocket. The number at the bottom, and they had made a custom printout. They had HR do a custom printout for each employee. So this actually represented this person's their actual income. So it showed them exactly how much they would be able to save by doing this. And he said it took him literally less than a second to decide that he was going to go to Arizona. This company is not ridiculously small. It only has several hundred employees, but that's pretty good size. And I'm hearing a lot bigger companies making the same calls. In fact, if you go onto Google and you do a search on companies leaving California 2017, you're going to find it's a pretty respectable list. In fact, I'll include a link in the show notes for today's show for an interesting article just came out this month, the first, so just a couple days ago, from the California Biz Journal talking specifically about this. Of the companies leading, add Jacobs Engineering Group Incorporated to the list. One of the world's top engineering and architectural firms, Jacobs has approximately $15 billion in revenues. Now, how much money do you think that's going to cost California? Now, California is not in a let's spend less money mode. California throws around money like it's going out of style. So they're going to have to get more money from somebody, and it's going to be from all the rest of us. And that's going to put more pressure on this tendency of companies and individuals to leave the state. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy as more and more people leave. Other design firms that are mentioned in this article, HKS Incorporated, RTKL, Page Sutherland Page, Perkins and Will. HKS CEO Dan Noble wasn't surprised by Jacobs' California defection. The move is being made for business regions, such as lower taxes and the business-friendly environment. It's absolutely nuts. So the reason why I kind of push this out there is I think that given this climate, now I don't know what it's going to take, but there are lots of states that are considered places to escape California. Texas is the top one. In this article that I mentioned from the Biz Journal, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and Virginia are the next on that list. This kind of a migration could be huge, not only for folks in Texas. Texas is the most logical one. We've done tons of shows on Texas. We've talked about Austin, Dallas, and all these other areas. And frankly, I still think Austin is going to be at the tippy top of that curve and the areas around it. So I still think that's an excellent investment. But for those of you who are interested in investing in places like Arizona, Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, I'm a little less jazzed about. Those are tending to get beaten up pretty hard. But I'll tell you what, when I was up in Washington, I still saw some deals that would absolutely be positive cash flow that would work even if you were paying retail prices. Arizona, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, North Carolina. I've heard good things about North Carolina. Been there a couple of times. Never really done an analysis of it. Florida, I'm a little bit cagey about, but I like Georgia and Virginia. So there you go. I think those are all places that you could potentially put on your list to consider if something you wouldn't mind doing is potentially taking advantage of what is shaping up to be a pretty time-tested migration away from California to escape a lot of the lunacy that goes on here in terms of tax burdens and all this other stuff. And we talked about the $15 an hour thing here in California. That's just one more thing that's going to push that along. It's also going on in Washington. So we'll see how that pans out. But the numbers on that are horrible. It's hurting people in terms of employment. Fewer people are getting jobs. There's an interesting article about that out in the Google sphere as well, if you want to check that out. All right, folks. That's about it for today. Apologies for the length of the show. I guess I just really needed to purge and get all of it out there to you today. I do appreciate you spending your valuable time with me, and I every day I am thankful for the people who make this show a part of their day. Thanks again for bringing me along for the ride. I'll talk to y'all next time.